I can't believe we're here. We're submitting starting lineups for week one. I actually have my own wide receiver start sit decision I'll talk about later in this video. But let's go tier one. We have Tyreek, St. Brown. Not going to waste your time here. I'll say they're both going to be very high scoring offenses this week. They're both guys that you start no matter what. Tier two, we're going to have CeeDee Lamb. Now, Lamb would actually be ahead of St. Brown for me in my rest of season rankings. The difference is CeeDee Lamb does have a tough matchup going up against Cleveland this week, where right now the Dallas Cowboys only have an implied team total of 19.75 points. And at the same time, if you were looking at Lamb, he did miss out a ton of time this training camp. Justin Jefferson will be our next option. With Justin Jefferson, looks like he is good to go. The question is, what does this offense look like with Sam Darnold? You're starting him, but I would be a little nervous about Darnold imploding. A.J. Brown will be our next player. A.J. Brown should be playing one of the highest scoring games this week, going up against the Green Bay Packers. The Eagles almost have an implied team total of 26 points. Jamar Chase will be our next player. Now, Jamar Chase is my wide receiver one in the Flock League. I am expecting him to play, and I am expecting to put him in my starting lineup. Is it worrisome that he missed so much? Yes. I'm a little bit worried about it, but any of these guys, they have to be in your lineup. Even Puka Nacua. Puka going up against Detroit should be arguably the highest scoring game of the week. Yes, Puka Nacua dealing with the knee injury all training camp. I don't care. You're going to start both Rams receivers. Dropping down to our next tier, I'm going to go with Nico Collins here at 8. Nico Collins going up against Indy. The Houston Texans have an implied team total of almost 26 points. Nico in the preseason showed that he is going to be on the field for pretty much every single formation. So absolutely no brainer to go ahead and put him in. Garrett Wilson at 9 will be our next player. I would have Wilson ahead of some of these other players in our rest of season rankings. The issue is the Jets have a very tough matchup going up against the Niners, where right now the Jets have an implied team total of only at 19.75 points this week. Drake London will be our next wide receiver at 10. Drake London going up against the Pittsburgh Steelers. Very excited to watch this game with Kirk Cousins under center. I'm very excited to see not only what we get from London, but also Pitts. And I do think that these are players you don't need to wait to see it before you just go ahead and you put them in your lineup week one. Jalen Waddle will be our guy at 11. I just traded for Waddle in the Flock League. He's an every week starter. Here, this game going up against Jacksonville, Miami does have an applied team total of 26.5 points. So they should just score a ton of touchdowns. Now, Chris Olave will be our next guy. Olave obviously is going to be in a position where he just absolutely dominates the target share. Going up against Carolina, the Saints actually don't project out too poorly at 22.5 points this week, which is more than what you would have for the Jets, right? Which is why Olave is actually pretty high in these rankings in comparison to the rest of season. Deebo Samuel has a tough matchup going up against the Jets, where right now the Niners are actually only at 23.75 points with their implied total, but Sticky Ricky is going to be missing this week, while Brandon Ayuk is back and good to play. At the same time, Ayuk did miss a considerable amount of time during training camp. So my expectation is that Deebo has a larger role at the beginning of the season, and maybe Brandon Ayuk actually expands his role as the year goes on. Cooper Kupp will be our next guy at 14. If you are looking at Cooper Kupp, he sounds like he's healthy. He's going up against the Lions. Should be a great game. Should be a shootout. I think Kupp is a must-start player, and if this Puka injury is actually more serious than I am expecting, then at that point, I think you can move Kupp even higher in these rankings. And then we're going to go to Davante Adams at 15. Davante Adams is a wide receiver in a very bad offense, will be in a very bad offense all year. The Raiders are only projecting to score about 18.5 points this week, but Davante Adams is an alpha wide receiver target that should close in on a 25 to 30% team target share. And while, yes, they add in the rookie tight end in Brock Bowers, we're not expecting Bowers to have a massive role right away. So those top 15 guys are players that, regardless of your format, regardless of your team, they are in your starting lineup. If you're playing in a format where you go, Mason, my team's so good, I'm ready to sit Jalen Waddle this week, I have news for you. You probably need to add more flex spots to your league. You probably need to add more overall teams to your league. Now, this is where we get to the interesting portion. I'm going to expand how much we're talking about these guys beyond. We're going to go Marvin Harrison Jr. at 16. Now, Harrison in my rest of season rankings will be much higher than a lot of the players that are getting ranked ahead of him. But I am always kind of conservative when it comes to projecting out rookies week 1. Am I sitting here saying that Marvin is going to get absolutely crushed? No. If you go ahead and if you look at his underdog pick'em this week, they actually have Harrison at 62.5 receiving yards, higher or lower. If you actually take Harrison to score a touchdown, you're going to get a 1.5x multiplier on that pick'em. I think he's still going to be a player you need to start because this should be a very high scoring game against the Buffalo Bills. Zay Jones is suspended for the beginning of the season. Harrison projects out to have a massive target share in this offense based off how good of a prospect he is. I just want to make sure that we have realistic expectations. And I think you look at the underdog pick'em at 62.5 receiving yards, and that is very realistic. But of course, if you wanted to go take the higher than 62.5 receiving yards for week 1 on Harrison, or if you want to get into a draft with us, where I'm still drafting every single night on the live stream, you can find that link to Underdog Fantasy in the description and the comment section. If you use code FLOCK when you sign up to Underdog Fantasy, you're going to get a Christian McCaffrey special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for week 1, and a Travis Kelce special pick'em, more than less than half a total yard for week 1, plus a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. And yeah, if you wanted to still get in a draft, they're best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the year. So I draft hundreds of teams every year. So I won $150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. And side note, we are also hooking up with rankings if you use code FLOCK. But Mike Evans will be our next guy at 17. If you are looking at Mike Evans, the Bucs are actually supposed to put up a reasonable amount of points this week. I think Evans is very easy to project to just have more touchdown equity than a lot of other wide receiver twos that you were going to look at. Now, because he will have that touchdown equity, it's not necessarily like you can expect a consistent rate of just flat production for Evans through the course of the entire season. You're going to get some massive blowout weeks for Mike Evans when he has the 2 touchdowns. You maybe have a few dud weeks where he doesn't find the end zone, but it should be a decent matchup going up against Washington, especially if you think Cliff Kingsbury is going to push the pace of play for Washington. So there'll just be more plays running the game. Now, Devonta Smith will be our next guy at 18. This is going to be another very high scoring game. Right now, the Eagles project out to score 26 points, 25.5 points against the Green Bay Packers this week. Jordan Love himself can go out there and really push the Eagles to have to throw the ball in the second half, which is something that is exciting here with the receivers. Brandon Ayuk at 19 will be much higher than this in our rest of season rankings. I am going to be a little bit hesitant with Ayuk. One, because it is a very tough matchup going up against the Jets. If you are looking at this Jets team, they have one of the best defenses in the NFL. This should be a much lower scoring game than you would naturally expect based off how good the respective offenses are, just because the Jets have both really good defenses. And actually what's funny is if you go over and you look at Underdog Fantasy at the moment, the Brandon Ayuk receiving yard pick'em is only higher, lower 54.5 yards. So I don't think Ayuk is a must start option week 1, just because of matchup, just because the time missed. Rest of season, he for sure will be. DK Metcalf will be our next guy. With DK, very excited to see what the Seattle offense does in terms of their 3 wide receiver sets, how many plays that they're going to be running, their pass to rush ratio. The issue that you may end up seeing here in Seattle is this should be a pretty easy win for the Seattle Seahawks. The spread in this game currently is about 6 points. So the concern would be that Seattle just goes up against a Denver team that can't move the ball down the field, and Seattle is running the ball in the second half. Now, what's very surprising is actually looking at the projections right now for the Chicago Bears players, where DJ Moore for week 1 on Underdog is higher, lower, 63.5 receiving yards. You look at sports books, they're putting the Bears at 24.75 points for their implied team total this week. So what this tells me is Caleb Williams is not going to start slow. Caleb Williams is someone that's going to immediately come in and immediately is going to be slinging the rock around. This is a good matchup going up against the Tennessee Titans, especially if you listen to this Tennessee coaching staff where they're saying that they're going to try to air the ball out with Will Levis. So maybe this is a higher scoring game than people are initially expecting. I think DJ Moore is somebody that you need to start, especially like we discussed, if you are looking at his underdog pick'em at the moment. Rashee Rice at 22. You have no Hollywood Brown this week. It is a Thursday night game. Now, obviously, Thursday night games typically are a little bit harder to project, and there's a little more randomness with them. But that's probably not the case for NFL kickoff, right? It's not like these guys are coming off a short week. Super excited to check this game out, and I think Rice probably falls in line as somebody that you need to start. And based off him most likely not getting suspended this year as well, I think you'd actually have him this high, if not higher, in your rest of season rankings. Now, dropping down to our next tier, this is where people are going to begin to have considerations of benching players if they're playing in a 10-team league where you only start 2 wide receivers and 1 flex. Stephon Diggs will be here at 23. I am ranking Diggs over Dell based off the preseason usage, where Stephon Diggs was seen in more 2 wide receiver sets, where Dell appeared to be more so in the 3 wide receiver sets. If you look at his underdog pick'em, right now he's at 58.5 receiving yards, higher, lower. This should be a high scoring offense in Houston. I mean, you could tell that based off where we are ranking Nico Collins this second. But there is an outside chance that we see week 1, Stephon Diggs come out and be the wide receiver 1 for the Houston Texans. That is a possibility. It's also a possibility that he's the guy that doesn't have the chemistry with CJ Stroud and starts a little slower. You have a wide range of outcomes with these guys that are going to new offenses and new situations. Michael Pittman Jr. will be our next guy in the same game. If you are looking at Pittman, there is a big difference between where he was drafted in high stakes expert drafts versus where he was drafted in just regular fantasy football drafts. I saw in regular fantasy football drafts, Pittman actually going as a very high end wide receiver 2, sometimes almost borderline low and wide receiver 1. And in high stakes expert drafts, on the other hand, you saw Michael Pittman Jr. going as a wide receiver 3. I think in reality, he's probably a little bit in between that. I'm ranking him as a low end wide receiver 2. I think in Indianapolis, this should be a very good offense. But more weeks than not, you're actually going to see the rushing volume be there. However, because you do have the Texans favored in this game, there is that outside chance that Indy falls behind and Anthony Richardson has no other shot but to have a ton of dropbacks and to have a ton of pass attempts. Plus, you are dealing with the Josh Downs injury. So honestly, if you wanted to move Pittman ahead of Diggs, I think this is a week where you very well could justify it. Now, T. Higgins will be here at 25. Now, with Higgins, I will remind you, I am making these rankings as of September 1st, and I am operating under the assumption Jamar Chase plays week 1. I'm going to be updating these rankings every single day on flockfantasy.com. I promise you, I will have my rankings updated every single day on flockfantasy.com from here to the end of the season. And if Jamar Chase, for whatever reason, is not playing week 1, T. Higgins will be flying up here. The issue you have is, while yes, the Cincinnati Bengals offense should score a lot of points, they are going up against the New England Patriots. If you are seeing the New England projection, right now New England's supposed to be the lowest scoring team in the NFL this week, as they are supposed to be all season. And this could very well be a situation where you have Chase Brown and Zach Moss just running out the clock in the fourth quarter. I still think T. Higgins is a very interesting play, especially if you think that you potentially have Chase starting slow with the missed time, but I'm very biased. Like I said, I do have Jamar Chase in the flock league, so I'm hoping Chase just hits the ground running. Now, our next wide receiver will be Malik Nabers. Now, Malik Nabers in my rest of season rankings is going to be higher than this. And honestly, if you are looking at where Malik Nabers is currently at with the underdog pick'ems, Malik Nabers is at 59.5 receiving yards. You could very well see him, come out and actually crush this ranking. I am just always a little bit hesitant when we are looking at the rookie wide receivers. While yes, Nabers looked great in the preseason, Daniel Jones looked absolutely garbage. Now, what is interesting is while the Giants are projecting out to be one of the worst offenses in the NFL this season, going up against the Vikings here, they're actually not that bad. They are currently projected, according to Vegas Sportsbooks, to actually drop 20 points against the Vikings, which would be respectable if you think Nabers can get to 25, 30% of his team's targets. And obviously, he is a great talent. But like I said, I'm always going to be a little bit hesitant to go ahead and just immediately start the rookies that we have never seen. But I mean, I was also the guy not starting Puka early on last year. But anyway, besides that, let's go over and let's look at Zay Flowers at 27. Zay Flowers going up against Kansas City Chiefs. It is the Thursday night game. One thing I will say, just a reminder, I know most people know this. If you are playing Zay Flowers, say hypothetically you have Zay Flowers, Devontae Adams, and Nico Collins all on your team. And you decide, okay, Zay Flowers is going to be my third wide receiver. I'm going to put him in the flex. Remember, you never put a player that plays Thursday night in the flex spot. Instead, put him at wide receiver 2 and move whoever your wide receiver 2 is down to the flex, just in case you have an emergency where a player that you previously thought was playing is actually ruled out. That way, if you had them in the flex, you can pivot over to a running back if you need to. But if you play a Thursday night player in the flex spot, in that case, you're not going to be able to easily pivot over to a wide receiver or a running back because you just don't have the flexibility for it, which is why it's called the flex. But anyway, let's move on behind this and look at Tank Dell. Tank Dell, very exciting wide receiver, very exciting offense. I'm going to be a little bit hesitant based off the preseason usage where it looks like he is primarily playing in 3 wide receiver sets, and it really is going to be Nico Collins at the very top. So I definitely think you can go ahead and you can start Tank Dell. I'm just very interested to see what this Houston wide receiver room looks like. And then Amari Cooper will be our next guy at 29. What's very interesting is while Dallas only has an implied team total of about 20 points, you actually have the Cleveland Browns at about 22.5. So the Browns are favored in this game against the Dallas Cowboys. The Browns are supposed to be a respectable offense. It's supposed to be a close game, so I think we should expect some pass attempts here. And this is the decision that I'm making in the Flock League right now. So this is for my second flex spot. I am kind of going back and forth between Amari Cooper and Terry McLaurin. You have Terry McLaurin here next at 30. Terry McLaurin is at 20.25 fantasy points. Looking at the projections right now, Underdog Fantasy does have Terry McLaurin up at 60.5 receiving yards for week 1, whereas they have Amari Cooper at 55.5 receiving yards. So this may be something that I end up changing my mind on. My thought process is if the Cleveland Browns are supposed to score more points than Washington, and the Cleveland does not have Deonta Foreman, they don't have Nick Chubb, Deshaun Watson doesn't have a ton of rushing equity, I don't know. I think that the majority of their points go through the air early on in the season before Chubb comes back. Whereas if we look at Washington with Terry McLaurin, they're supposed to score fewer points. They have a better rushing game than what you're actually seeing with the Cleveland Browns at this point of the year. And I'm expecting both of these wide receivers to absolutely dominate with their respective target shares. Now, of course, with Amari Cooper, you do have David Njoku. You don't really have that tight end competition in Washington. Maybe Sennett ends up being good. We just don't know yet. In Cleveland, I guess maybe you have Jerry Jeudy, where in Washington, no wide receiver 2 here is as good as Jeudy. Looking at what Underdog has in terms of the projected passing volume, they do have Deshaun Watson for 231.5 passing yards this week, whereas they are looking at Jaden Daniels with 217 passing yards this week. So the passing volume actually isn't too different there, which is interesting. Now, going over and looking at our next guy with Calvin Ridley, like we said, I think this can be a very decent game between the Chicago Bears and Tennessee Titans, where sportsbooks have the over-under at a respectable range. And from what we've heard from this coaching staff all offseason now, is it sounds like Tennessee, they're going to come out and they're willing to air it out. So if they're willing to throw the ball with aggression, I think Calvin Ridley is somebody that you can go through and you can look to start, especially if DeAndre Hopkins were to miss. Right now, I'm making this ranking under the assumption that DeAndre Hopkins plays week 1. Like I said, on flockfantasy.com, I will update my rankings every single day this entire season. So if we get any change in news, you can just go ahead and see them there. And obviously, if you're not already on flockfantasy.com, the link's in the description. If you use code FLOCK, you'll get 30% off any sub. And with an annual Mother Flocker subscription, you will get a free team review from myself. And yeah, flockfantasy.com is also where we're going to be answering all the live fantasy football questions every night on the live stream this year. But George Pickens will be our next guy at 32. With Pickens, he falls right in line with like Terry McLaurin, where this is going to be a wide receiver that has absolutely everything in his offense. I don't even think Roman Wilson's going to be playing this week. So the wide receiver 2 here is, I don't know. I don't care. He is buns. Russell Wilson starting. Russ starting will be better than Justin Fields starting for George Pickens in particular, where the passing volume can be a little more respectable. The issue is going to be, it should be a very low scoring offense, should be a bad offense. Right now, sportsbooks only have the Pittsburgh Steelers scoring 19.5 points this week. You look at Underdog, his higher, lower on his touchdown. You actually get a 1.7x multiplier if Pickens scores a touchdown this week, which does really indicate that Underdog has no faith in it. But going over to our next wide receiver, I think we need to move Jaden Reed down. I don't know why the projections are so low on Jaden Reed this week. Jaden Reed is at 42.5 receiving yards this week for the Green Bay Packers. Higher, lower. You go over and you look at our next wide receiver in Chris Godwin. Chris Godwin's at 57.5. Now, because Jayden Reed plays in a very good offense, I think that Jayden Reed does have more touchdown equity than some of the other wide receivers in this tier. But to be completely honest with you, looking at these projections, looking at the target share that you should see from Christian Watson, Dontavian Wicks, Romeo Doubs, the tight ends in this offense, I think I'm too high on Jayden Reed in these rankings, and Jayden Reed is going to be falling to the bottom of this tier. We'll update the rankings on flockfantasy.com right this second, and I'll probably be tinkering with them all week. But anyway, Chris Godwin, our next guy. Godwin, the main thing to look out for in week 1 is going to be the utilization that you have in the slot. If you get a ton of slot snaps, a ton of routes run from the slot for Chris Godwin week 1, I think that's going to be very bullish going up against Washington. It's not supposed to be a super low scoring game. Keenan Allen is somebody that's difficult to rank this week because naturally I kind of want to assume that the options that you are going to have at rookie aren't going to dominate in targets. So I don't want to sit here and act like Rome Odunze is just going to come out here and completely crush. But Keenan Allen also at the same time is dealing with the foot injury. You have the reports with Keenan Allen gaining weight. If you actually look at his underdog pick him at the moment, he's only higher, lower, 44.5 receiving yards. But obviously, if you're playing in a full PPR format, the reason that you're starting and the reason you drafted Keenan Allen isn't necessarily based off his receiving yardage volume. And instead, you're just kind of hoping you get the cheap receptions there. Now, Christian Kirk will be our next guy at 36. If you are looking at Kirk, this is going to be another guy with an injury to monitor. This is another situation where his target competition in Brian Thomas Jr. is somebody that I'm not expecting to come out and just completely dominate right out the gate, even if I love these guys for their rest of season upside. And then also with Kirk, you have to worry about Evan Ingram just having a ton of target volume. I'm not a big Kirk guy. I don't think he has a crazy high ceiling, and I just kind of want to see him healthy week 1. Now, our next guy with Xavier Worthy, I think you could say has a way higher ceiling than where we are ranking him here. If you are looking at Worthy, you have no Hollywood Brown for kickoff at this point. That is a massive bullish signal. It's also the Thursday night game, so if you want to have some fun, if you want to have something to root for, you can go ahead and you can throw him in. My hesitation is just going back. I want to see the roles with these rookies. I actually want to see them get some in-game action. I think that there is the outside chance with Xavier Worthy that the Chiefs view him more so as a field stretching player where he is just going to be opening up space underneath for Travis Kelce and for Rashee Rice. Where if that were to happen, then maybe he's a phenomenal real life option and maybe not a great fantasy option. I think the range of outcomes here is extremely wide. If you wanted to go through and start him, you do you. I just don't have the cojones to get really excited about putting rookie players in my lineup week 1. And Worthy right now, if you are looking at Underdog, does have a higher, lower 44.5 receiving yards for Thursday night. Christian Watson will be our next guy at 38. With Watson, another example of a player that's very difficult to project out. You have so many targets in Green Bay here. You don't know exactly how these guys are going to get used. And this is another great example of if you can wait just 1 week, you can see what the targets, you can see what the routes look like for Christian Watson and Jayden Reed. I think these guys have a ton of upside rest of season. I just don't necessarily know if we're super excited to project them comfortably week 1. I know people are going to absolutely hate this Deontay Johnson ranking. I get it, but Deontay Johnson dealing with injuries all training camp. Deontay Johnson going up against the New Orleans Saints. Right now, you actually are looking at the Carolina Panthers projecting out to be the second worst offense in the NFL this season, where Deontay Johnson and the Carolina Panthers have an implied team total of 18 points. If you're playing in a full PPR format, maybe this doesn't matter as much. Maybe the touchdown upside doesn't matter. But if you look at Underdog, you get a 2.23 multiplier for a receiving touchdown for Deontay Johnson. His higher lower is 44.5 receiving yards. I actually put out a tweet saying that Terry McLaurin, George Pickens, Malik Neighbors were all very similar in that they were wide receivers that are going to dominate targets in very bad offenses. And a lot of people in the comment section said, hey, what about Deontay Johnson? You missed Deontay. No, I did not miss Deontay Johnson. You have Xavier Legette there. They took Xavier Legette in round 1. You have Adam Thielen there. Are we sure that Deontay Johnson is that much better than Adam Thielen? So I'm a Deontay hater this year. I get it. Jackson Smith and Jigba is somebody that has a higher ceiling than this rest of season. I definitely think you should be excited about him. But in terms of starting in week 1, I know a lot of people are thinking we're going to get more 3 wide receiver sets here, and they are excited about that. But I don't know. I think JSN, somebody with a wide range of outcomes that I would just kind of want to see what his role looks like week 1. Cortland Sutton will be our next guy here. If you look at Cortland Sutton, the Denver Broncos currently project out to be the 3rd worst offense in the NFL this week. It's not supposed to be a high-scoring game in general going up against Seattle. You have a very safe, projectable volume. But, I mean, all these guys are kind of in the range where if you're playing in deep leagues, you're considering it. But if you only start 2 wide receiver and 1 flex in your league, I really hope you're not looking at these players. Jordan Addison at 42. I'd love to see Jordan Addison fully healthy. But like I said, surprisingly enough, based off what you have with over-unders right now, I would have assumed that Sam Darnold versus Daniel Jones is going to be a very, very low-scoring game. But sportsbooks are saying that there should be a respectable amount of points scored. But I would really like to see a healthy Jordan Addison before you go through and put him in your lineup. For my best ball teams, I hope he just crushes immediately. But Rome Odunze will be our next guy at 43. Rome's another example. I just want to see what it looks like between Keenan Allen and Rome. I think I could easily rank Rome ahead of Keenan Allen rest of season. But for week 1, it is a little tough. If you look at Rome, you're getting a 1.88 multiple on his touchdown pick'em at the moment. Now, our last here, these are guys that I kind of want to say don't start. They may be appealing, but Brian Thomas Jr., let's just see what the role looks like week 1. You can see a lot of Gabe Davis routes run, which I know people aren't going to want to hear it, and I would rather have Brian Thomas Jr. rest of season, but sometimes these rookies are starting a little slower. Joshua Palmer, I want to see what the splits look like with Ladd McConkey. Joshua Palmer, the big Q. Hopefully the big Q shows up. But anyway, Jamison Williams. Jamison, if you're playing in like a tournament on Underdog this week where you are just chasing the highest ceiling possible, this could be a very, very high scoring game. And right now, the Lions actually project to be the highest scoring offense in the NFL this week. So if you wanted to go through and say Jamison has a crazy ceiling, then sure, look at him. Now, the issue is the floor is going to be extremely low. I think he may end up just stretching NFL defenses and creating space underneath for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Right now, Jamison is actually at 37.5 receiving yards for his higher lower on Underdog. Keon Coleman at 47. Keon, absolutely love him for rest of season. But all these guys, such as Keon Coleman, Khalil Shakir, Curtis Samuel, 1, it's difficult to rank with the Curtis Samuel injury. 2, it's difficult to know exactly what this wide receiver rotation is going to look like week 1. So I'd rather just roster them for their rest of season upside, but not have to start them. Ladd, we already talked about, kind of the same thing. I want to see what this Chargers situation looks like. DeAndre Hopkins, I want to see healthy there at 49. And Tyler Lockett, I want to see healthy as well at 50. But I hope that we are able to help you out here. And of course, if you have any start-sit questions, drop them in the comment section. I'll try to answer as many as I can. We're answering all start-sit questions submitted through flockfantasy.com as well. My rankings are going to be up to date every single day on flockfantasy.com till the end of the season. Use code FLOCK if you want 30% off any sub. And last but not least, of course, if you wanted to check out any of the pick'ems, if you want to get a Christian McCaffrey more than less than half a total yard for week 1, Travis Kelce more than less than half a total yard for week 1. If you want to get in a draft with me, we're still drafting every single night on this live stream. It's all on Underdog Fantasy. You can find that link in the comment section in the description. Use code FLOCK to get all of that, plus a 50% deposit bonus up to $1,000. But I think that's all I got for you. Really do appreciate you. Really, you have a great day, and really hope we get to see you out in a live stream and draft with you later tonight.